session is about the 3D sum. So I've seen this function called a few things, a 3D sum, a drill through sum, to name but a couple. And I guess it doesn't really matter what you call it, although for this session I'm going to refer to it as a 3D sum. The important thing is to recognise that there is functionality available to sum across multiple sheets. Another important thing is to have a good understanding of how to use it and what can go wrong if it's used incorrectly, or possibly just with poor modelling discipline. So what is the point of a 3D sum? Well, as I've said, essentially it allows the user to sum the same cell, or indeed the same range of cells, across a number of sheets. And a really good example of when you might look to do this would be, say, the aggregation of several business units or divisions. Now, these things are always easy to understand with a worked example, so let's do that. Okay, so as you can see, I've created a very simple model that contains 5 business units, BU1, BU2, all the way through to BU5. Each of these contains some fairly basic financials, sales, cost of sales, ultimately down to net income. Then in the summary, I've also created basically something with the same structure, but with formally only for gross margin and net income. So the challenge here is essentially to write a formula that will aggregate all the sales in this case for the 5 business units. Easy, I hear you say. We can do something as simple as this. We can say equals business unit 1 C4 plus business unit 2 C4, etc., etc. And of course, you're right. This is something that is doable. But imagine this maybe. What if you had 50 business units rather than 5? You still could do exactly what we've described here, but, and this is, I think, is a big but. Firstly, I think it's quite a dull way to spend your afternoon coding that up. It's a long formula, and possibly then more importantly, there's a high risk of introducing errors in that particular methodology. The chance you might miss a BU, you might add one in twice, you might incorrectly reference a line, etc., etc. All of which feels like a gamble I just don't want to take. And then I suppose the third point I would make about this is, and this kind of sort of borrows from my own personal experience, say perhaps working late at night with the group FD who suddenly says, do you know what, I've got a great idea, why don't we add this in or take this out? And that to me means that you've got to do what? Recode the entire summary? That feels like a problem. So, as with most things in Excel, there is another way. And I want to introduce the idea of a 3D sum here. And it's a method that I've used or seen used on countless occasions. So how do we construct this? Well, we say equals the sum. We open a bracket. We click on our first sheet. We click on our last sheet. And then we select the cell that we're looking for, which is C4. Close a bracket and hit enter. We get a value of 12,800. And there's always going to be that question of, is that correct? Now, we could open each of the sheets and we could sort of add them up on a calculator. I'm not going to do that. What we have done is created a little bit of a summary that just picks up the values from each of the business units 1 to 3 to 5. And as you can see, that sums to 12,800. So that's great. All good, we say. However, I have to say, in terms of a methodology, I'm actually not that keen on the methodology I've just shown you. And the reason I'm not so keen is because it relies on the sheets being in a particular order. Now, I might be in the minority here, but from time to time, I accidentally drag some of these sheets from one place to another. So let's do that, just as if we were accidentally doing it. I'm going to move BU5 to the left of BU4. Now, does that have any impact? We have a look, and now my sales value is 9,800 rather than 12,800. And you'll note the difference is 3,000, which is BU4. Now this isn't Excel misbehaving. This is not one we can blame on Microsoft. Excel is doing exactly what we've told it to do, which is to basically give me the total of all the cells C4 in the sheets B1, in this case B2, B3, and to B5, because that's what we've told it. Yeah. So if that happens and I've suddenly moved a sheet, I feel like that gives me something of a problem. So what would I do differently? Well, what I would do is I would always follow the party line that was drilled into me by many years of what I consider the best modelling group in the world, and I would use boundary sheets. So what are boundary sheets? Well, they're relatively empty sheets that we use to create the boundaries of your 3D sum. And I put these before the first sheet that I want to sum, and after the last sheet that I want to sum. I then construct my formula in the same way. So moving back to the summary, we create that in exactly the same way we did before. We say equals the sum, open brackets, pick my first sheet, pick my last sheet, but this is the boundary sheets rather than the BU sheets, and I pick cell C4. Close the bracket, hit return. As you can see, I still get a value of 12,800. So we're happy that it's working. Okay, in reality, the use of boundary sheets doesn't really do anything that different from the first method. It basically sums the cell C4 across all the sheets between the first name sheet and the last name sheet. However, the discipline of using boundary sheets is a really good one. Experience shows that clients like to have a little fiddle with the order of sheets, perhaps to reflect geography, alphabetical order, financial performance, or perhaps they just wanted to drag it to somewhere to have a look at it. Who knows? But keeping sheets within clearly marked boundaries can definitely help to make sure all the relevant financials are included. Now, back to my point about the Group FD's brilliant last-minute idea to include or exclude one of the BUs. This is now really, really simple. So I'm going to just unhide an additional sheet that I created, BU6. As you can see, BU6 is outside of my boundary sheets. And we'll just go back to the summary to make sure it's still showing 12,800. Brilliant. But if I drag BU anywhere between those sheets, doesn't really matter where we do it, I'll put it between BUs 1 and 2. Go back to my summary. My summary's changed from 12,800 to 16,000. If I just have a quick look in BU6, I can see that the sales for BU6 are 3,200, which is my difference. Okay, brilliant. Well, but that's adding in. I could also exclude a BU. So let's just drag BU1 out. Again, go back to the summary. My 16,000 has dropped to 14,000. The 2,000 being the difference, being basically BU1. Now, while this formula works really, really well and can save you creating some really, really long formulas, especially when you've got a lot of template sheets, there are, as with all of these things, just a few things to note. First thing is that the formula we've created might look a little bit weird. Just going back to that formula that we created, you can see it's equal to the sum of basically some funny things, some chevrons if you like. And it might be better sometimes to just have something in addition in your in the name of your boundary sheet to say, perhaps say start and perhaps say end. It doesn't really matter. The important thing, if we go back to the summary sheet, you'll see that's now updated. The important thing is just to make sure that your client's on board with what you've done, so possibly a little bit of education. Second thing is, your sheets that you're summing, in this case BUs 1 to 5 or BUs 1 to 6, need to be constructed in an identical manner, or at least the bits you're trying to sum. As you'll probably have seen, I'll just put BU1 back in the fold. So BU1, all the area, all the rows and the columns are exactly the same. So again, when you're thinking about sort of using a 3D sum, think about the construction of your template sheets. They need to be identical, at least the bits you're summing need to be identical. A bit of planning is needed. The third point is that you need to be really, really disciplined when you're inserting a row or a column. If there is a need to insert a row, let's say, you need to highlight all the sheets that are included in that 3D sum, i.e. including the boundary sheets. So let's see what happens if I make the change to only one sheet. It just doesn't really matter which one. I'll pick business unit 3 and I'm going to insert a row just above the sales line. Okay, so let's go back to our summary. It was showing at 16,000. We've taken out BU3. Yeah, we've taken out 1,600. Why? Well, because Excel's still doing exactly what we told it to do before. It's picking up cell C4 from this sheet through to this sheet. And in BU3, C4 is now blank. We'll undo that. Okay, so yeah, we're all back, just to check that we're all back to where we should be. Perfect. Okay, now what happens? Well, let's say we don't include the boundary sheets when we do our insertion. And this is a classic mistake that people make. They just pick up the business unit sheets. Again, let's insert. We'll do it above the sales line. Okay, go back to the summary. Summary now says no sales. Again, Excel's done exactly what it's supposed to do. It's saying cell C4 from this sheet, and you can see all of these sheets, there's nothing in C4. So it's all right. It's all perfectly correct. But we just have to be careful. Again, I'm going to undo that change. We'll check that we're still back to where we should be. Yeah, perfect. Okay. I said way back that the boundary sheet should be relatively empty. My personal preference, and you'll see this from the way I've constructed this model, is that I have in my boundary sheets the same timeline and the same row columns, row headings, I should say. And the reason I do this is that it makes constructing the formula so much easier. If I go back to here, I'll put it in D4 rather than C4 just for a change. I'll say equals the sum, open brackets, start sheet to end sheet, and I want to be in D4. Now, if I didn't have my row and column headings, I'm almost guessing where I want to put it, and that's less good. Okay. The next personal preference I would have is, and you'll see that how we've done this, is my summary sheet. I've got things in C, so my sales for 2024 are in C4, as was the case everywhere else. Now this is just a personal preference, it's not required, and it won't always make sense to do this. But for me, it just kind of gives me comfort that everything's in the right place. Okay, a final point I want to make here is I showed an example of including and excluding BUs to kind of show a quick sort of what if you did this and what if you did that. Whilst that's quite helpful and quite handy, I will say that if you're going to do this as almost a matter of course, as part of your scenarios, then build it into that scenario functionality. And that's something we'll cover in future sessions. Okay, so in a nutshell, that is the 3D sum. Please look out for my other sessions. Thank you.